In Shakespeare's play, the Prince of Denmark, Hamlet, goes on a killing spree that destroys his family, friends, his immediate circle, and then ripples out to cause mayhem and disorder in the whole nation. There's something rotten in the state of Denmark. As a side dish, he sends the woman who loves him barking mad so that she commits suicide, and he dies too. The stage at the end is a butcher's shop. There's blood, carnage, confusion, madness, sexual terror, suicide, the murder of ordinary human feeling and love, and lies and deception. And what sets this horror in motion? It's a ghost, something that may not even exist. Even the characters aren't sure it's real. Is it real, or is it a vapour of nothings, an apparition, a creature of the mind? Even Hamlet isn't sure that what propels him to destroy his world is actually real. So the cause of this carnage may be something purely imaginary, but it becomes a justification for turning his world into a slaughterhouse. The power of ghosts and the attendant speculation that goes with them is huge. They are the shapeshifters in the dark that frighten us into doing terrible things. When ghosts are created for us, speculative phantoms, half-truths and downright lies, things conjured up to frighten us into doing terrible things or allowing others license to commit atrocities with our silent, implicit approval, we enter the same mad spiral of deception, uncertainty, and violent action that Hamlet experienced. Many of the wars in our time, in the Middle and Far East, for example, invariably began with lies, the ghosts of truth. And like all good ghost stories, they will return to haunt us. The spirit of Hamlet is currently causing global mayhem. Spectral monsters are created around the flesh and bones of real people. Saddam Hussein, once an ally, became a fiendish tyrant. Gaddafi, once an ally and friend, became miraculously recomposed as a tyrant. Osama bin Laden, trained by the Americans, became a fiendish enemy to the free world. Assad, once an ally, is now the devil incarnate. China, once simply a place where mostly Chinese people lived, is now a landscape of imaginary fears that threaten Western civilization. Shouldn't we be getting just a little bit tired of the same old ghost story, the same narrative spewed out every time the US and Britain and their allies want to bomb the crap out of yet another country and steal their stuff, and then lie their heads off that they are doing it in the name of freedom and democracy? Does anyone really still believe that shameful, ghostly nonsense? It's not even a good ghost story because it's tired and repetitive, and it insults the intelligence of those of us who are meant to believe it. And it piles up chaos around us so that the few can increasingly govern the many, not with wisdom and strength and courage, but with fear and deception and cruelty and ghosts. In the Shakespeare play, we have a maelstrom of violence and death caused by an apparition, something essentially unreal. Just like the invasions of Iraq and Syria, the manipulated insurrection in Libya, which is now known as Hillary Clinton's war. The ghost in Iraq was the presence of mass destruction. There were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Like ghosts, they couldn't be found or seen. But it was worse than Hamlet, because the people who said the weapons were there knew they weren't. It was a deliberate lie, a manufactured ghost to scare people into doing something, because the one thing you can be sure of with ghosts is that they will irrationally frighten people into action. At least Hamlet considered the ghost had actually appeared and might therefore be some sort of justification for murder. But even he might have thought twice before the murder of millions, and at least he committed some of the murders himself. The cowards who create the ghosts in Iraq and Syria and other places remain firmly in their Armani suits in their government and media offices, surrounded by security guards, and they send others on mass murder sprees. The ghost is manufactured in secret, whether at the Pentagon, Westminster, Camp David, or some swanky hotel, and then the mainstream media and much of Silicon Valley become the harpies who fly around spreading the rumours, giving credibility to the lies, giving shape to the ghost. In a spiral of Chinese whispers that convince people that it must be true because so many whispers and words and shouts and blamings cannot be wrong, surely. A recent ghost in Syria is the chemical gas attack. One of the very few journalists to investigate the truth of this claim said there is no evidence at all to support the claim that Assad attacked his own people with chemical weapons. Why would he, when the eyes of the world are upon him? It was an apparition, a spectre of smoke and mirrors, a lie, believed in only by those who want to carry on an illegal war, asset strip yet another part of the world, destabilise even more of the world, and remove an elected leader, i.e. this is the Americans and the British and the French leaders and those gullible enough to believe their ghost lies. Some of the reporting from Syria is so patently fake that it shows how far we've come in our loss of analysis and critical thinking. We accept these spectres as flesh and blood real. In one BBC report, the journalist, though the term German journalist is a misnomer, said that a bomb had been dropped which clearly had napalm in it. A month or so later, the same report was shown as if it had just happened, but the word napalm had been edited out and replaced with chemical weapons, because that was the stick the US and Britain needed to beat the war drum and to justify yet more missiles being launched at this beleaguered country. This reminds me of the grotesquely hilarious BBC reporting during the Twin Towers collapse, another piece of theatre it now appears, in which BBC person Jane Stanley stands before a window telling us that the Salomon Brothers building has also collapsed, when the building is clearly visible behind her and intact. It's actually 8 minutes later when the building collapses. The news, if it can be called that, is given to the BBC before events happen. Because these events are not real, they are theatre events, rehearsed and then enacted to a gullible world who believes all this is real. The building is a very solid ghost, haunting the collapse, not of buildings, but of collective truth. When the effect of the ghost starts to wane, another is manufactured. It's actually the same ghost. In the play, when the ghost appears again to Hamlet, it says, "Do not forget, this visitation is but to whet thy almost blunted purpose." So the ghost is now clear about what it wants, to stir up Hamlet's desire for bloody murder. It's the same ghost, the same lie, but with the new gloss, as in our world. Assad has made a new attack on his own people. Saddam Hussein may not have had chemical weapons, but he's a tyrant. Gaddafi is no longer our friend and is now officially a tyrant. Russia is war hungry. China is the new enemy. Palestine is full of terrorists. The purpose is always the same, to create a spectre of fear, then send in the military hardware for regime change, oil grabbing and asset stripping, and to destabilise as much of the world as possible to create a permanent theatre of war. The use of the term theatre of war is a favourite for the US and England, and it's apposite because it brings us back to Shakespeare. Hamlet uses a play to create the scene for final bloody carnage, a play within a play. The Western media is very good at that, getting people to act out events and then pretend it's real. In Iraq, the supposedly spontaneous pulling down of the giant statue of Saddam was a completely staged event. The Pentagon flew in, pro-US Iraqis, sealed off the area and assembled the world's press to watch. We think we live in a world of real events, but we live in a permanent theatre peopled by bad actors and manufactured ghosts. Look at the hundreds of thousands of people affected by the spraying of Agent Orange in Vietnam. Agent Orange was a powerful herbicide used by US military forces during the Vietnam War to eliminate forest cover and crops for North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops. Millions of gallons of this toxic stuff was dropped over 5 million acres of farmland and jungle. Over 2 million people have been affected by it, and children are still born with horrible defects and illnesses. And it's still there, poisoning the soil and bodies of people. Some of the effects will last for 100 years. This is a haunting where the terrors of the past cast a long shadow, and the dead and dying still call out to the present. If only we could listen. Creators of this poison madness said afterwards they didn't always know what they were doing and weren't sure of the effects of the herbicide. These are the people who govern us, saying they had no idea what they were doing, but the results of their actions haunt us today. Hamlet says of the ghost, "The spirit that I have seen may be the devil, and the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape, yea, and perhaps, out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very potent with such spirits, abuses me to damn me." Ghosts are the fictions of the controllers and the deluded, preying on weakness and fear and insecurity. And they, as Hamlet says, abuse us to damn us. I once asked a group of students to imagine Hamlet as a comedy or a farce. And it was as if it released something in them, because they could see the terrible illusions that motivate people, the grotesque power of creating fear and anarchic chaos, the ludicrous and horrifying things that human beings are capable of, which are almost appallingly comic. And so you have to laugh, not because the things themselves are funny, but because they are so horrible you'd go mad if you faced them head on all the time, which is what happens in Hamlet. We need to switch on the house lights and show the dark, cowardly figures pulling the strings in this terrible theatre of lies. And with the lights on, perhaps the ghosts might disappear.